right, good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is, I think Michael already pointed out that, yes, it is February 15th, not February 14th. So, Todd, we had one more typo that
I can't believe it.
I know. So,
I was
we'll
hung
get
up on
corrected.
Valentine's Day, man.
Yep. So, thank you for pointing that out. We'll get that one corrected in there. That's a small thing. But welcome, everyone. Second Patch Tuesday of 2023. And there were some interesting things going on. We've got a few things to cover. We're going to also talk a bit more. We've had requests to try to bring in some additional things, like a little bit more about Apple, and we've got a whole section for that coming up towards the end here today, extending kind of our between the Patch Tuesdays, because Apple rarely ever releases in tandem with Microsoft's Patch Tuesday release. So that the biggest challenge there is always one of timing and data availability and things like that. But we're going to try something here today, looking for your guys' feedback on, is this more of what you're looking for, or how do you want to take a look at that? So keep an eye out for that part, and please do be forthcoming with the feedback as we go through that. All right, so starting off, we're going to go through just a recap of Patch Tuesday. We had Microsoft and Mozilla. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we're going to get into some of the more recent news. There's actually quite a few 0 days and other security concerns happening out there. Some may affect you, some may not, but wanted to give kind of a high-level view of other things to watch for. Todd will then run us through the bulletins and releases. And then we'll get to that between the Patch Tuesdays section. And again, where we're starting to kind of get into a little bit more depth on Apple as well, trying to give a more detailed recap on some of their activities. So without further ado, starting off, Microsoft had 14 bulletins or updates that released yesterday. They actually, this is looking like what our average Patch Tuesday was, last year and before. But even with a lot of the ESU releases going away for the most part, this month there was .NET, Exchange, and SQL. So it's quite a loaded Patch Tuesday as far as everything that released from Microsoft. Mozilla dropped a little bit later in the day, but there was a Mozilla Firefox and Firefox ESR release as well yesterday. So we got those included in here. Adobe did have a lot of their additional, more, they typically categorize them as priority 3 update products. From a security perspective, they're just not as widely used, not as widely targeted. So they typically are a lower concern from a security and urgency standpoint. They did release those again later in the day, so we didn't cover too much there, but no Reader or Acrobat was covered in that. So in case you saw that advisory come out from them, they did have quite a few products come out, but they were all priority 3s. So not a lot of urgency there. News-wise, here we go. Starting off the lineup, we do have in the last day here, some news has been coming around about iOS and iPadOS 0 day that was identified and is being targeted in some attacks. Not widespread from the reports, but Apple's always a little bit tight-lipped about everything there. There are some confirmed reports of the CVE being exploited. So I wanted to share some details there. Now, for those of you who might be new to the On24 platform, you've got right now the window that's displaying the slides. I'm about to share my screen, so another window will pop up there. You can resize your screens however you like there. We're going to be going through all the links on this slide in the second screen that I'm going to share out here. So that's the one you want to look at for the next little while. There's also some other things in your screen, like access to some downloads, including today's deck. So if you want to grab that PDF download, you can actually get to all of these links in the PDF and be able to open them in your own screen as well if the screen share is a little bit hard to read. So I'm going to share my screen, and it looks like it's taking a second here. There we go. Entire screen. Oh, they changed their layout for the screen share. Hold on a second. Tab window. Oh, that's that. Okay, there we go. I found the right one now. Okay, you guys should be able to now see my screen, and the article we're looking at first is Apple releases new fix for iPhone 0-day exploited by hackers. So hopefully this is easily readable for you all. So this, again, most of these articles started to air within the last 24 hours here, so you may or may not have heard too much yet. But we've got reports of a 0-day. It does affect the, if you go into the link here that goes into the security update from Apple, it's affecting iOS 16.3.1 and iPad 16.3.1. These are the two releases that just came out. There's two CVEs that were resolved as part of this. The first one is a kernel vulnerability, and that's CVE 2023-23514. The second one is this WebKit. It's available on iPhone 8 and later, iPad Pro all models, iPad Pro Air 3rd Gen, iPad 5th Gen, and iPad Mini 5th Gen. The impact here is if an attacker were to craft a maliciously crafted website, this could allow them to lead a user to it and give them the ability to execute arbitrary code. This is the one that Apple is aware that they say may have been actively exploited. So again, as I've kind of mentioned before as well, Apple is usually tight-lipped and very elusive about confirming anything like this as much as possible. Where some vendors like Google, Adobe, Microsoft, several others are a lot more very specific. If they've got confirmed exploits, they're going to tell you a little bit more directly. So this is about as good as it gets coming from Apple. But just so you're aware, the CVE in this case, 2023-23529, is the vulnerability, and that is the specific platforms that you're going to want to make sure this is rolled out to. They didn't confirm, was it on the iPhone or the iPads that this was actually exploited. So from the best of what we can provide you for information, best to make sure both your iPhones, your iPads, all of them get updated, within a reasonable time frame here. Doesn't seem to be a widespread, large-scale attack going on, but with a confirmed exploit, devices are at risk. So make sure that you take that into account. So that is the iOS vulnerability. There's another article here that I think went into a little bit better detail. They provided a little bit more, and you can even get a little bit of the writer's kind of response in there as well, Mike, about Apple's kind of slight acknowledgement of a exploit happening here, but he gives a little bit more detail about the specific versions that are updated. So make sure that you take a look at either of those articles, whichever one you prefer there. Just wanted to try to give everybody enough information to look at and resolve this. So the second vulnerabilities that we wanted to talk about today are affecting Go Anywhere MFT. So this is an attack. Clop ransomware is claiming that they've breached over 130 organizations who are using the Go Anywhere MFT platform. So it seems like a web content platform. I'm not familiar with it entirely, but in this case, they reached out to Bleeping Computer directly, stating that they've been attacking many organizations with this, executing these ransomware incidents. The vulnerability that they are claiming to be exploiting is this one here, CVE 2023-0669. It could enable an attacker to gain remote code execution on unpatched Go Anywhere MFT instances with their administrator console exposed to the internet. Now, the Go Anywhere team was seemingly a little bit immediately dismissive, saying, "Oh, hey, that's only if it's exposed in some way. You have to have administrative access and access to the platform." Well, in this case, it's actually happening quite a bit, and I can't remember if it was this one or the next one, but one of them talked about the fact that Yeah, here it is. Shodan is showing that over 1,000 Go Anywhere instances that they've detected so far are exposed online. Only 135 of those are on ports 8,000 and 8001, which are the ones that are used by the admin console. So of the instances that they've detected that are internet exposed, a limited set of those seem to be available here, and it seems to be pretty close to the number that the Clop ransomware team have claimed that they've already exploited. So they might be at the upper bound of what they have kind of low-hanging fruit available there. But definitely, if you are running Go Anywhere MFT, this is something you'll want to take a look at and make sure you plug that or ensure that you do restrict the internet-facing access of that platform to make sure that you reduce the potential exposure there. So I had a couple of articles about that one. This first one talks about the Clop ransomware claims. The second article here talks a little bit more about the 0 day specifically. So in here, it talks a bit more about the researcher, what they found, and it kind of goes back into the, hey, public facing exposures. They even had a difference. So apparently this article had found even more of those exposures on port 8000 or 8001. Mitigations are available, so you can get additional details here if that's something where you need to take some more immediate kind of mitigation actions and reserve the patching for a later window if that's needed. So two good articles there talking about the situation. And again, if you've got Go Anywhere MFT, immediate need is definitely look at this, see if it is internet facing. If those ports are also exposed, that definitely puts you at higher risk because there's tools out there to be able to scrape and identify cases where you're vulnerable to this pretty quickly. All right, next in line, some continuing discussions around VMware and the ESXi ransomware attacks that have been going on. Apparently, since the original ESXi vulnerability was exploited, there have been some additional discussions about continuing targeted attacks around this, and that there might be a new vulnerability in play that's being targeted as well. So far, VMware has said that there's no evidence that there's an additional unknown security vulnerability that's being targeted in this. So we are still dealing with attackers taking advantage of the previous vulnerability that was already patched a couple years back here. So CVE 2021-21974. There's an update available for this. They are urging customers to update their ESXi servers to that. And so far, there's, the claims of there being another unknown vulnerability have so far been unsubstantiated. So just wanted to make sure that people are aware of that. If you are running ESXi and you do have some systems that are potentially internet facing, especially because again, a lot of the ones that have been exposed here have been ESXis that have VMs that are more internet perimeter or internet facing. So those are the ones to definitely be concerned about. But in general, make sure your ESXi servers are up to date. The active exploit that has been confirmed is definitely one that is patchable. Last one from today, for those of you running Lexmark printers, a researcher decided that the fruits of his labor were insulted by the price tag that was being offered for the vulnerabilities that he discovered and disclosed privately to that vendor. After receiving that, paltry sum that, insulted his, level of effort that he felt he put into this, he decided that it was more valuable to actually disclose this information publicly. So unfortunately, what this means is any of you who are running certain models of Lexmark printers, the ability to take advantage of and exploit this vulnerability has now been released out into the wild. So there is a public disclosure. The maturity of the exploit code is definitely able to exploit one or more of these vulnerabilities. But how weaponized is it? Obviously, there'd be a little bit more work to do to bring this, into a actual campaign or anything. But it does mean that attackers have this information in hand. So take a look at this. There are patches available to resolve the CVE. It's CVE 2023-23560. Looks like they had potentially, it looks like everything's released under one CVE assignment, and they did have this affecting 100 models or more. So if you're running a Lexmark printer, assume that there's a good chance the models you're running are in that set of printers, and that you're going to want to take a look at the advisories here. There's a few links to the advisory with details there. Again, you can see there's a very long list of printer models that are out there, and the affected releases, basically the version of firmware and previous, and what you need to get up to be secure. So take a look at that and see if you are impacted by this. Again, enough information has been exposed here now that for an attacker to take this and take advantage of it, not a huge effort at this point. There are some workarounds defined in there as well, disabling the web services on the printer, blocking that port. Those activities could mitigate the vulnerability until you have a chance to go out and update the firmware across all of your Lexmark printers. So that is our lineup of third-party zero-day announcements. Okay, so before we jump over, yes, so Michael, and again, directly from that article, you can get to the link that we've got here. I'll respond to you directly in there, but actually I'll send it to all. So anybody who needs to get that Lexmark advisory page, I just sent out that through the Q&A section. Everybody should be able to see that. ESXi version, do we need to update to? So that, I don't know if they've got it in this article, but there were definitely previous articles. 2021 ESXi 7.0 U2C and ESXi 8.0 GA began shipping with the service disabled by default. Okay, so that's just them saying they changed behavior there to reduce impact. I don't see a direct link for the ESXi versions, Jason, in this particular article. So you would have to go back to earlier articles to validate which that was, from the original round of articles that were released. There's definitely a lot of information out there, and you should be able to get that pretty quickly. I'll see if I can grab it as we're going through other things. Chris suggested not to install 7.0 U2, but to go to 7.0 U3J. Oh, apparently that Lexmark link that I sent over missed a F at the end of the link. So thank you, Benoit, for that. My apologies. That I don't know why that cut that off, because it looked like the whole thing was highlighted there. So must be a character limit in the response, maybe. I don't know. But make sure if you did get that cut off there, that you grab it, just add an F onto the end for PDF, and that'll work for you. Thank you for catching that, though. OpenSSL had, let me see if I can get that article to come up here. OpenSSL. Let's see if this will get the article here. On24 doesn't let me copy an URL directly out of the Q&A section, so I couldn't just go directly to that. I don't think this is the same one. No, that was from October 23. We'll have to see if I can get that article there, but there's Martin shared a link about an OpenSSL fixing a high severity data stealing bug and recommending to patch now. See if that'll get it. Yeah, I think this is the one. And that one I didn't see in my news lineup this morning. I was even went multiple tabs in, and this one didn't get into SEO to get up the list. So thank you, Martin, for sharing that. I will also share that out to everybody. That's another good bit of news for everybody to be aware of. Cool. All right. I think I got through most people's questions there. Let us go ahead and jump on to the next. So now we're going to get into the Microsoft 0 days. There were 3 of those this month. So again, we're going to go through, I'll continue on my shared screen here for just a little bit, just to talk about these 3, and then we'll switch back over to the slide deck. The first one, CVE 2023-21715, is a vulnerability in Microsoft Publisher. It's a security feature bypass. In this case, it is only rated as important. So all 3 of the vulnerabilities today were only rated by Microsoft as important. That doesn't mean they're at lower risk of being exploited, unfortunately. So this is one of those things where if you've heard me recommend getting to more of a risk-based prioritization, this is why. Knowing the vendor severity, even knowing CVSS scores, we've seen CVSS scores down in the 4s and 5s be actively exploited by threat actors, and some of those even hit the ransomware and trending level. It all comes down to what is going to motivate or get the attacker what they need to be able to fulfill their goals. So more of what you need to understand is there any disclosures, any known exploits? Are there people researching it? Risk-based platforms are pulling that type of information, both from white and black hat threat actors. We pull from a number of different sources to get that type of information. So they're able to see into communities in the dark web and be able to see conversations going on about a specific technology or even a specific CVE or CWE. And from there, they can start to extrapolate what's at risk of being exploited, what is actively being exploited, and even what's trending. So looking at the types of ransomware attacks going on, the CVEs reported in many of those incidents, give us the ability to identify which vulnerabilities we should be paying attention to. And this gets us down from tens of thousands to the point where we can get down to saying, hey, if you take care of, I believe our latest ransomware report will be coming out here shortly. This is something that Ivanti does in partnership with Cybersecurity Works, one of our partners. But that, I think, is looking at about 360 vulnerabilities that are basically within the core ransomware platforms today. If you block those 360, you're going to take a whole lot of risk off the table right away. So that's the type of thing that a risk-based prioritization process will help you with. That being said, a couple of things to note about this one. In this case, the attack itself is carried out locally by a user with authentication to the targeted systems. So this is where, again, that severity went down. In this case, though, again, it's something where an attacker can convince a user through social engineering to download and open a specially crafted file from a website, which could lead to a local attack on the victim's computer. So social engineering, not a huge bar for them to overcome. This allows them to bypass the Office macro policies used to block untrusted or malicious files. So even with those macro policies in place, this is exploiting that and bypassing that security feature to do what it wants to do. So that's where the risk of this one comes into play. It has already been targeted in different attacks. So again, make sure to get this rolled out as quickly as possible. This vulnerability exists in the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise. These are both click-to-run apps, but make sure that for those of you who use click-to-run kind of in its native form, every time you run it, it should be trying to check in and get any updates that it needs. If you're basically, if you're controlling the update process for that, basically not letting it go out and talk directly to Microsoft and get what it needs, if you're controlling that, make sure you update your click to run version internally so that when you run that click to run app, it's going to talk to the right location and it will see that there's an update available. So there are ways to do that, but most people, for the most part, when you use click to run, are just getting it, getting the latest every time you open that application. So second vulnerability is a vulnerability in Windows graphic component that could allow remote code execution. This one is CVE 2023-21823. Again, only rated as important. The code maturity in this case is high. They've confirmed that there's code out there. It's well established. It's a good code sample for somebody to take and run with it and be able to replicate what was done by the attacker. So the previous one, the code maturity was a bit more unknown. They don't have a good feel for how well baked it is and how quickly somebody else could take it and run with it so that other threat actors could replicate what's been done. In this case, it's definitely at a high level of code maturity. This one gets a little bit more complicated. So let me jump down a little bit first. There's two different sets of updates for this. There are the OS updates this month. So all of the Windows versions that are still supported are needing to get this update in place. In this case, for the Windows platform, the Windows OS, this is an elevation of privilege vulnerability. It could allow the attacker to get system level privileges on the target system if affected. The other variation is in the Microsoft Office for iOS, Android, and Universal. So these are the different App Store versions of Office. In this case, this variation of the vulnerability could allow remote code execution. If you're on the Microsoft Store or Android, so Google Play, they've got additional notes in here in the FAQ section. So the Microsoft Store should automatically update the affected application if it's on any of your users' machines. It is, however, possible to disable those automatic updates for the Microsoft Store. If you do that, the store delivered app will not be automatically updated. You can get the update through the store by following this guide, and then it has a guide to go and do that. So that gets to be where this is a little bit more challenging. So if you've got the Microsoft Office app through the App Store, and you have cases where you may have disabled the auto updating, this is what you need to get more details on that. Otherwise, it should take care of itself. For Android, if you're doing OneNote for Android, this is the article on how to update the Play Store and apps on Android. So go to this for guidance. So that's the additional notes I wanted to make there. OS level, again, very simply, it's part of the cumulative rollup for this month. You should be good to go there. All right, third and final 0-day from Microsoft this month. This one is a vulnerability in Windows Common Log File System Driver. It is another elevation of privilege vulnerability, only rated as important. In this case, again, the code maturity is unproven, meaning they don't have samples enough to know how well established this is. Is it off the shelf ready to go and somebody can take it and replicate it easily, or would somebody have to do some work? Fact of the matter is, either way, it is exploited in the wild and confirmed to be exploited. So, oh, come on. Change that interface to, I don't like that as much. All right. In this case, again, elevation of privilege, and if the attacker exploits this, they could gain system level access to that device. This one, again, affects all the Windows operating systems. One thing to note, I'll note this here real quick. You're gonna, January and earlier, you would have seen us go into a lot more of the ESU updates. Now Microsoft is done with Windows 7, done with Server 2008 on-prem. The only way to get ESU support for Server 2008 and 2008 R2 now is by continuing, but only through Azure. So if you are doing a fourth year, it has to be done through Azure and using the update service through Azure to get access to those updates. So that's the only case where ESU still applies. There are people planning to still run that, it's going to be a much limited set. So we won't touch on that separately from everything else anymore. Basically, when we talk about the server updates for the month, server 2000 or 2008, yes, it could be included in there, but we're not going to single it out specifically just because the conversation is very, very niche from here on out. So be aware that that's in there. And if you are interested, that's how to get at it, is you do need to run those workloads in Azure to get access to that. Continue your ESU support with Microsoft as well, and then you can get those updates. All right. So I am going to, let me go through a couple of questions here real quick first, just before I jump into the rest of this. Is it true that if the Microsoft Store is blocked, that some versions of OneNote won't be able to update? So Kyle, on that one, again, if you're saying that you are blocking the store, not just disabling it on the device, my assumption and then is kind of the equivalent would happen, whether you disabled the Microsoft Store or you're blocking it altogether in some other way. Basically, you won't be able to get those updates, and you have to go to that article that Microsoft referenced in the FAQ section of that CVE. And from there, looks like that's just telling you from the Microsoft Store, you need to be able to go into the library, get updates, and force that update all process there. If you're trying to do something beyond that, Microsoft has not been very forthcoming with like doing any type of side loading or anything else through their App Store. It's just you're using the App Store or you're not. So if there's other documentation out there for that, it's not available in what Microsoft provided here. Yeah, both Windows 10 and Windows 11, you pretty much have to go into the store and force those updates. So, any news on the IE11 EOL? So Todd, you're gonna, how much are you planning to cover that in your slides here in a little bit?
There was an update in the tech community this month about what they're doing with the EOL of IE11 and what they're updating it on. I don't know, how do you post a link here, Chris? What's the best way to do it for the group?
Best to do it in responding to the question, and then you can, so if you go to Brent's question, in the dropdown, instead of sending it back to just Brent, you can send to all, and then everybody will get the URL in response. So that'll be the easiest way.
Let me see if I can do that. Send to all. There we go. I just sent it out. There's a good update in there. They just updated the article yesterday talking about the fact that they're no longer updating it in Windows 10, a lot of different versions. We knew that from June of last year when they first announced the end of life on IE11. They are continuing to update it as part of the cumulative updates in Server 2012 and 2012 R2, because it is the primary browser still used there. And also, they said in June of this year, they're going to start removing like icons and all references to IE11 in Windows 10, etc. So that's kind of the update right now on everything they're doing there. And I sent that link out to everybody in the...
Yep, so check your Q&A chat there, and you should have that link to get more details there. Perfect. Yep. Yeah, I don't know if anybody has any additional details there, but she is saying that after Print Nightmare, they've been having troubles deploying printers out through GPO, and asking kind of what others have done around that. I think there's quite a variety of things that people are doing around that, Chi. I don't know of any specific articles or things there, but if anybody does have additional details and you want to share that, I can try to share it out additionally. There were a couple of questions about some of the domain controllers, some of the issues that were happening since kind of going back all the way to November last year and through up December and January as well. We've definitely been hearing from a number of people that there's still kind of definitely some people having challenges with things. I think, Todd, didn't we hear about somebody who, like, all of their 2008 server domain controllers stopped communicating after November, and they actually had to get up to a certain patch level to get those to communicate again.
Correct.
2012 had a few challenges as well. I don't remember them offhand, though. Do you remember?
Yeah, there were some authentication issues around the server 2012s. I mean, 2008s, my bad. Microsoft had said like they needed to go back and apply the August of 2019 update. And well, obviously any cumulative updates up until the end of support, which was 4 months later, would fix them. So they went back and applied those, and it did open up communications again between their 2008 and their domain controllers properly. However, obviously that's a long time ago, and there have been a lot of ESUs and updates since then. So you got to be cautious, even if you get your things even if you get your servers communicating again. There obviously are a lot of vulnerabilities present.
Right. All right. I think one more, and then we'll move on. Praveen mentioned this vulnerability, 2023-21799. This is one of 6 vulnerabilities that was resolved in SQL Server. So this one was interesting. I actually had to go back and do a little bit of research on when's the last time we saw this type of an update for SQL. It's been a while. So Todd and I were looking through, and SQL is rarely updated on Patch Tuesday. They typically, when they do updates, it's like, 1, 2, maybe 3 vulnerabilities they're resolving. I had to go all the way back to 2009 to find a single update where they resolved 6 vulnerabilities in one shot. So this is actually a pretty big update for SQL from a security perspective in years. I didn't only one of the 6 was critical. The other 5 were important. There's definitely several vulnerabilities in here, including the one you're looking at there, Praveen, that are definitely concerning as far as what the attacker could do. In this case, this one, the attacker could trick an authenticated user into attempting to connect to a malicious OLEDB, which could result in the server receiving malicious network packets. I would say that 6 vulnerabilities, and several of them had, some interesting things about them, definitely means that you don't want to sit on this update for too long. No disclosures, no active exploits against any of these. So, I would say, get your teams on it to investigate and see, how quickly you could roll this out. But urgency is more on do some validation, make sure everything's tested well before you roll it out. There's not a, hey, get this out in the next, week or something like that kind of urgency on this one. So that's the best I've got for information there, just because there's no direct activity against it. The other one, just to mention it real quick, is Exchange did have an update. Todd's going to walk us through that one as well. 4 CVEs resolved in that one. None of them disclosed or actively exploited, but with the level of attention that Exchange has been getting in the past 2 years, we've had a couple of very specialized threat actors who have been focusing their attention on Exchange, and they're really, really good at it. 4 CVEs, each with some pretty dangerous capabilities in there. For all you with Exchange still, I would suggest I would put that one above urgency, compared to SQL. But Praveen, definitely don't leave the SQL one out there for too long. I would say try to address it within the next month, ideally. The Exchange one, I wouldn't leave that one for very, very long at all. There's a strong likelihood that it'll be targeted at some point here, one of those 4. So that's my suggestions on those. But I didn't have any additional details to call out on those. So.
Chris, just a quick note. The link I sent out, for some reason, on 24 made some modifications to it. I did send out an updated link to the IE11 end of life to a couple of people and to the group in general. So sorry about that.
Yep. And Chad actually made a good suggestion here. So if you aren't familiar with it already, I'm going to refer you over to patchmanagement.org. And this for everybody on this group as well. If you're not already a member of patchmanagement.org, it's a group that's been around for a very long time. I mean, we've got probably 10,000 plus companies that are members of and collaborate on there. It's discussing patch management related issues. So everything from some of the domain controller challenges that people have been having, other things like your question around printing and how are people managing that. These are common topics for patchmanagement.org discussions. So I would suggest jumping over to that patchmanagement.org forum and ask your question there as well. I know they've tackled it a few times, but definitely a very good option to get some additional information there. There was one other suggestion from Matthew. He said, unfortunately, after Print Nightmare, it's best to set your print server to FQDN in the point and print GPO settings, then bypass the 2-printer install settings and live with very limited Print Nightmare risk is kind of the suggestion that he made there, or only deploy printers via GPO and don't let users pick their own printer. So that's a couple of suggestions there. Hope that helps out a little bit. But again, if you bring your question out to patchmanagement.org, a very large community and a lot of people very willing to help provide additional details there. So, all right. We have run through several of the questions there. I'll keep looking to see if there's any more, but on that note, I'll stop sharing and we'll wrap up the first part here so we can get into the bulletins. There were some additional dev tools, Azure services, and other things that were updated there. So again, these are not things that are typically directly patchable by you all. Other groups may need to be involved, either development teams or operations teams need to be aware of those things. ESU support, 2012 R2. I can tell you there's a lot of companies that are already having conversations about this, whether it's budgeting, planning, getting a plan together for how they're going to manage. But that 2012 end of life is in October, but it's going to creep up on us awfully fast. So buckle up for another 3 years of ESU fun for Server 2012 and 2012 R2. End of lives for the Windows 10 and 11 platforms. We've got some upcoming ones here coming in May and June, respectively there. So keep an eye out for those end of support dates for 20H2 and 21H2 to stay ahead of any branch upgrades in your environment. Content updates for those of you who are using an Ivanti product. You can get content updates for each of our products out in our community. Go ahead and sign up for those. That way, as we go through between the Patch Tuesdays here in a little bit, you'll see all the good stuff there. All right, Todd, over to you.
All right, thanks, Chris. As Chris mentioned in the intro, we had a couple of security updates besides Microsoft drop yesterday. We saw a major upgrade for Firefox 110. So if you're using this, 19 vulnerabilities addressed. Quite a few, large drop for them. They rated it high, and we rated it as a critical just because of the sheer volume of CVEs that were addressed and the possibility of remote code execution there as well. In addition to the standard Firefox, their extended support version, ESR 102.8, also got released yesterday. 14 vulnerabilities there. A lot of overlap, obviously, with the regular Firefox. There was one different vulnerability in this particular list, but you can see the actual list if you go off to the advisories themselves to take a quick look. All right, on the Windows 11 update, we didn't see, it's kind of a slower, less number of vulnerabilities addressed this month. We only had 33. Chris did talk about the two that were known exploited, the 21.823 and the 23.376. Those are both known exploited, and Chris talked about them earlier. Kind of be aware there are two versions of Windows 11 running right now, 21H2 and 22H2. So those are in active support. A couple of issues that were carried along from previous releases. These are all on the new version, by the way, 22H2. The first one has to do with provisioning. This has been kind of an out-of-the-box, literally experience, as they say here. It's been present from the beginning of this release on provisioning. They do have a workaround, and they are working on a resolution. This slow copy issue has also been around for quite a while now. It has to do with files taking a long time to copy between systems, so be aware of that one. Something that's new this month, they announced it on February 14th, yesterday, with the release, the fact that there are some problems with distributing the updates. And this has to do actually with the WSS servers themselves. It turns out that if you upgraded like Server 2016 or Server 2019 to Server 2022, that sometimes you're missing these unified update platform MIME types, type files. And this is a big issue. They do have a workaround. You can go in and add in the definitions to make this work again. Interestingly enough, Microsoft Configuration Manager distribution is not affected by this, but kind of be aware of this one if you start having problems with distributing your updates this month. On Windows 10, a few more vulnerabilities addressed, 36 than Windows 11. Again, those same 2 0 days that Chris talked about in quite a bit of detail. Windows 10, of course, has its share of issues as well. I saw earlier there was some commentary about Server 2012 having some cluster update issues in some of the questions I was getting while I was answering here earlier. But there's also a cluster update issue in Windows 10 itself. This one is somewhat self-correcting, as I mentioned, in that the services will start up after a period of time. They say about 20 minutes in the actual KB article, but you may want to force them to start up earlier. Obviously, Server 2012 has this missing UUP file definition type as well that I talked about just a minute ago. This problem has been around for a long time. I'm actually debating whether to keep carrying it forward. We know that Microsoft has updated to the Chromium version of Edge from the legacy version that they were using, and there are some issues when you upgrade from older versions to new, depending upon what's happened as part of that upgrade process. But this is a known issue. You might run into it. I think most people are probably past this one by now if they've been updating regularly. As Chris mentioned, ESUs came to an end last month, so we're into like the regular updates. Chris talked about Server 2012 will be coming under ESU support in October, so we have a few months left on regular updates to the server. This month they addressed 33 vulnerabilities. Again, those same 2 that we've been talking about all along here from a 0-day perspective were also present in Server 2012 this month. We do have this domain join issue. This is probably a result of some of the changes that Microsoft has been making in their protocol and their authentication in the operating systems themselves. There have been some Kerberos changes and some others, so I think that's probably what's this resulted from. But there are some issues with syncing up with systems when you're setting up your domain, so kind of be aware of that. It does exist in both the monthly roll-up as well as the security-only updates. As I mentioned every month, Microsoft has 2 versions for these older operating systems. The monthly roll-up includes a huge update going all the way back to, it's October of 2016, a long time ago now. And they've included a huge number of vulnerabilities and performance enhancements through the years into kind of one large update. They also do a security-only update, which introduces and fixes just those vulnerabilities for the given month. In this case, this month there were 32 in the security-only version for Server 2012. We did also get a monthly roll-up for Server 2012 R2. Be aware that the affiliated desktop version, Windows 8.1, did reach end of support in January last month. So they're no longer providing security updates for 8.1. Not that there were, I think, all that many systems probably left out there. But if you do have some, be aware that there are no updates anymore. We also have the security-only version, of course, for Server 2012 R2. 32 vulnerabilities addressed here. The biggest difference between the monthly roll-up and the security-only is because of the single vulnerability that was addressed in Internet Explorer 11, which is still in support on these server versions. Talk about that here in just a second. Chris did mention there were updates for SharePoint Server, just 2 vulnerabilities this month, 21.7.16 and 21.7.17. In the chat session, there was some discussion around 21.7.16. This is kind of an interesting one in that it's exploitable in Microsoft Word in the display pane. And so this is a very important one. This was rated critical, which is what drove a lot of these Office and other updates to a critical level this month rather. We did have the Office 365 update. As Chris mentioned, this 21.7.15, although only rated important, was a 0-day this month, and that 21.716 is the one that actually drove this up to a critical level. 3 vulnerabilities addressed in the online, click-to-run update versions of these Office 365 apps, Office 2019, and Office Long-Term Service Channel 2021. We did see regular updates for the on-premise versions of Office as well. Primarily 2 versions, Office for Mac, the online server, and Word 2013 and 2016. Again, that 21.716 vulnerability driving this to a critical level this month, so make sure that you update this one in particular. Chris mentioned SQL Server as well. Covered a lot of my material this month, Chris. Talked about 6 vulnerabilities, the largest in a long time. Also note that this is the first that we've seen an update for SQL Server 2022, so it's been a while, even though they released it last year. We do see the first update for it this month. There were some questions around whether Ivanti is going to support that. The answer is yes, of course, and we should be releasing the updates for that either today or tomorrow under SQL Server 2022, so be aware of that one. Getting to the important updates this month, we have security updates for Exchange Server, updating all the supported versions. There are several of them listed there. You can see from 2013 to the latest on 2019. 4 vulnerabilities. These were all just rated important. None of these were publicly disclosed or known exploited. So, this is kind of in your secondary round of patching if you're doing so on the important side by severity. Also on the important, we have the updates for Internet Explorer I talked about. Again, Microsoft has dropped support in most operating systems for Internet Explorer 11. There was that drop last June of 2022. And if you do have some questions on that, take a look at the link that I dropped in the Q&A sessions on kind of what the current status is. As I mentioned, they are still supporting it as part of the cumulative updates for Server 2012 and 2012 R2. Obviously, they'll continue to do so through the end of life of those operating systems because they're the primary browsers in use there. They are supporting IE through basically emulation mode in Microsoft Edge. So that's the way that they really want you to go forward. And as is mentioned in that article that I forwarded, they are going to start with the June 2023 update this year, removing all kind of like vestiges of it, visual icons and things like that in the operating system. So you'll see Internet 11 slowly kind of disappear from your user interface. Only 1 vulnerability addressed this month with this update, 21.805, rated important. We did see .NET framework updates this month. They are also just rated important, addressing 2 different vulnerabilities, 21.722 and 21.808. You can play those out with your updates this month, but again, just rated important. The .NET updates also come in the monthly roll-up form as well as the security-only form as well. There are some issues with WPF apps. You can take a look at that. I did reference the KB article 5022083 at the bottom of each one of these if you do run across a particular problem when you're updating. And they do provide some information on how to correct this and a workaround there. So that's it as far as the bulletins that were released yesterday. Chris, do you want to cover between the Patch Tuesdays? Chris, are you out there?
Yes, I had been trying to track down. I was looking at there was a question about if one of the SQL patches or CVEs affected clusters, and unfortunately, in the process of that, I buried my window and didn't get back to my mute button quickly.
Okay.
The answer was no. I could not find any specific answer or references to clusters specifically for any of the 6 CVEs. So I don't know if any of them specifically relate to that or not. All right, so we do have quite a few. Google Chrome had a couple of updates recently, one resolving 4 CVEs, the other resolving 10. Git for Windows resolved 3. Oracle had their quarterly CPUs, so Java got updates, and then from there, all the Java development toolkits updated, and of course, all of the variations after that. So Azure Zulu, Eclipse Adoptium, that one I didn't remember we had that one, but I was expecting Corretto. Well, Corretto's in here somewhere.
Yeah, it is.
Then we had VirtualBox VMware Workstation Player, Workstation itself. There's Corretto. Yep. So you can see that many of them had 2 or 3 CVEs resolved for each of the different Java frameworks. Expect that if you're running any type of Java framework, it got some updates this month because of Oracle's release. And then Firefox and Firefox ESR. There was the release yesterday on Patch Tuesday and this additional one that happened since the January Patch Tuesday. So if you get to 10 or 110, you'll cover everything that was included in these as well. So the other thing that we wanted to touch on was getting into Apple specifically. So we had several people wanting to get more information about when and how Apple updates. They do a continuous release cycle. There's no predictable date for it. They just release when they release. So for third parties on Apple devices, they update similarly to Windows. Typically, you'll see Windows and Mac OS get updated simultaneously. But the Apple did release updates for Mac OS Big Sur. They resolved 8 vulnerabilities in Big Sur and 18 in Monterey. And then they had 3 vulnerabilities resolved in Safari. And that, I believe, was it the 7th or the 8th of February? It was just like at the beginning of the month here that they released. So that is pretty fresh. And by the way, the 0 day that was just being announced on the iOS and iPad, separate from that earlier release, that's all just happening within the last 48 hours here. They also had updates for Google Chrome, for Microsoft Edge, additional one for Google Chrome. So you could see, yeah, they had the fixes for 4, fixes for 10, similar to what they did on the Windows side, and Microsoft Edge had Edge Chromium, so they fixed 4 CVEs in Chrome. Microsoft releases an Edge update that fixes 4 CVEs there, that sort of thing. And then Firefox on the Mac OS as well, also released. So that is giving you a bit of a rundown of all of the Mac-related updates that happened since last Patch Tuesday as well. Typically, again, you're going to see the third-party apps when they release for Windows. They're also going to release for Mac within a fairly close time frame, if not simultaneously. So that should be pretty similar there. But for the Apple OS and Apple products, it's, again, they don't have a predictable schedule. It's continuous release. All right, SeaMonkey, 30 CVEs resolved in the latest SeaMonkey release. That one was a bigger one there. And then Thunderbird had 8 CVEs resolved. All right, yeah, so there was a lot of them there, and I apologize. I went through that quickly because we were right down to the end of our time here today, and I didn't want to run over too much if needed, but couple of questions regarding some of those third parties. I've seen Firefox release V110 for critical updates. So yes, the Firefox 109 release that we covered here, that was, again, that between the Patch Tuesdays. The 110, that's what released in yesterday's update, which we covered. Oh, push to audience. There we go. All right. So that was, yeah, Microsoft uses critical. Mozilla, typically high is the highest level you see with them. So that's why you see a little bit of a terminology difference there. But Mozilla's high is typically equivalent to Microsoft critical.
Yeah, they do provide periodic critical updates. And one thing to keep in mind, just like all vendors, Mozilla's updates are cumulative. So the 109 updates are included in the 110 update. But although the 109 update may be rated truly critical, they readdress the level of the update, kind of release by release. So this one may be only rated high, although previous releases would include critical fixes. So yeah, it's all a question of, how do you do it month by month or release by release and track them that way.
Right. Todd, there was the question about Edge support on Server 2012. So Chrome had been, ramping up to drop support for a bunch of the older platforms for Chrome in general. But there's questions of, after Edge 110 updating, that it no longer supported being installed on Windows Server 2012 R2.
Yeah, I'll have to go take a look at that because I'm not I didn't see an announcement on that, but I'll take a look and let you know.
Yeah, so Chad, we didn't see anything specifically on that. I didn't either. So we'll try to dig into that more and see if there's something going on there. And hopefully we'll have a more concrete answer for the group next month for sure. Let's see. Patrick, I unfortunately don't know offhand if CrowdStrike's script control protects against the Office Outlook vulnerability. I would think that there's a chance it does, because that vulnerability is specifically bypassing the macro policies to bypass the security features. So as long as CrowdStrike is using some additional capability there and not relying on Microsoft's capability in some way, I would think that there's a good chance it does, but I would definitely suggest confirming with them. But based on the nature of it, I would think that there's a good chance it would. All right. I think, did we get everybody's questions?
Yeah, Richard just sent me the link here that said Microsoft Edge version 109 will be the last browser supported on 7, 8.1, and Server 2012, 2012 R2. So 109 was the last.
So no browser support whatsoever?
Not Edge.
Oh, not Edge. So are they supporting IE on it yet?
Yes, they are supporting IE 11. So that's why there was an IE 11 release this month.
Got it. Okay, so IE 11 will continue just on the 2012 platform. Okay, so hopefully that helps out answering those questions. David asked the question, will we send out a recording of this? Yes, the recording and presentation will both be available from our website where you signed up. There's a Patch Tuesday page, and on there's going to be, we'll update that as soon as we get everything processed and make that available. There will also be a follow-up email that you should all get that lets you know that content is available there. So keep an eye out for that. And typically later this afternoon, is when it happens, but depending on how quickly, the processing from the platform gets to us and everything gets out to the website, could be tomorrow morning or into the day. So within the next 24 hours for sure, though, we should have that. You can also, Kendall just let me know the email is sent tomorrow, so you'll see that tomorrow. But David, if you grab the PDF version of the presentation before you log out of On24 here, you can grab the presentation, at least you have all that information. The recording is really the piece that you'll have to get later on today or tomorrow when it's up on the site available. All right. Great. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will catch you next month for yet another round of Patch Tuesday fun.
Thanks everyone. Have a good month.